What if a logo could be an entire system and adapt to fit every scenario? Maybe you've seen museums adapt their logos to different collections, or food brands who change their logo depending on the different flavors. This is called dynamic branding. And today, Jeremy and I will talk you through how to actually accomplish this for your own branding projects. First off, let's gather some supplies and our favorite design books. So you might ask yourself, what's the point of a dynamic logo? Why not just keep it simple with one really strong mark? I think this is such a valid question, and not every brand needs a dynamic logo. I think they're a really good fit when you're wanting to create some sense of dynamicism, movement, and energy in the brand. And also when they have a lot of different parts of their business that you would like to be able to represent in different ways. Since you're using the logo for so many aspects of the branding, it can also be a really good way for a company with a very limited marketing budget to help get that mark recognized a little bit faster. Let's have a look at some examples that really inspired us. We found this one example from an agency called Atipo that was working on a brand called Ström when we did one of our latest branding projects. The client here is made up of a lot of different creative professions, and Atipo wanted to represent that in some way. So they have the mark be this combination of the letter S and an infinity symbol to show all these different capabilities and the flexibility. And as you can see, they have lots of different variations of the mark, but we're still getting that recognition of it being the same brand, even though the details are a little bit different. The name Ström actually means electricity or a river flowing in Sweden, so that is a really good sense that this is a brand that has dynamicism at the core of it. This is a great example of having a connection to that brand mission and why we have that reason to create something dynamic. I also want to share a really fun example that I just found on Instagram by a designer called Kamkami. This is for a pasta brand, and this character Nonna is the main part of the logo. But then the dynamic aspect is exchanging the hairdo depending on the type of pasta. It's such a perfect example of how humor also makes us remember something in logo design and how it doesn't always have to be super minimalist to work as a logo design. To create your own dynamic logo, let's start by having a think about the purpose of the dynamicism and the idea behind your logo. A while ago now, we worked with a company that focused on telling stories that weren't traditionally being told. And this could be of revolution, of small businesses starting, or even things like literary things that were happening in books that we love in the cities that we're visiting. I'd like to start by thinking about different ways that we can connect that sense of movement with the company values. For example, we can create something related to the movements of these different streets. So we could have different ways of representing this movement, and it could be different kinds of streets working in different ways. But the overall flow could be the same, for example, all going up in one direction, but taking different little paths to get there, for example. We could also maybe have a think about how the stories are changing your perspective in some kind of way. So maybe you're starting off at one point with some kinds of perspectives that are in a certain way, and as you're moving towards a different set of scenarios and you've gone through all of these stories, you might be ending up with something different, like you might have these different edges curved, but the shapes are still in a kind of similar position. We also thought about this idea of a door opening, so having this door kind of be the way that someone is experiencing something, having a before and after experience. You could do the door in so many different ways. And I think this is something where, as long as you have a core idea, so these would be too different from each other, but if you would have it be, for example, the doors all have this same perspective, but you have them be a little bit different in some ways. You know, you could have these different portals that are all kind of the same idea. I think this would have to be developed, but I just think it really represents this thinking process of trying to get a sort of pattern going and then seeing how you can make different variations on it. When we were working on this project, we really liked this idea of having like a door into a new perspective, but we felt like the important thing here were the people and their stories. Since a lot of these stories are not in a traditional museum or in walking tours, for example, we wanted to give them the same status of being in a fancy high-end museum. And since people are listening to these stories on their phone as they're walking around the city, we thought about using the phone as a kind of frame. Now, we don't want to just have a simple frame. That's going to be a little bit too static. When you're at this stage and you have a solid idea of what you actually want to accomplish, make sure to take your time and explore all the different directions. Make lots of sketches and make sure you're also testing your idea by applying it to real life scenarios. Is it actually adding something to the brand? Is it making it more powerful and impactful than if you just had a single variation of the logo? And also, how will the client use this from day to day? We can create something absolutely stunning, but if it's not easy to use, chances are it just won't be used day to day. Whenever I design logos, I like to do a little check to make sure that the mark hasn't been designed by someone else already. There's a great site called the WIPO Global Brands Database where you can upload an image of your idea and it will check it against existing trademarks. It's not a foolproof method, but it's nice to know there are no obvious conflicts. Here's what our final dynamic logo looks like in context. But once you have your design ready, how do you make sure it's going to actually work in practice? First off, make sure you create custom lockups for all your different variations. We've talked a lot about dynamic logos today, but you might have heard another term called responsive logos. Responsive logos are referring to the mark adjusting in complexity when you have smaller and smaller formats, like this. So while dynamic logos adjust to the context, the complexity stays the same. But in responsive logos, the mark gets simpler and simpler the smaller it gets. Using a dynamic logo system doesn't mean that you can't also use a responsive logo system. Start by focusing on what the core elements of the mark are. For example, you might want to make a smaller version solid rather than having a lot more details. Or you can start removing elements to simplify it. As a brand designer, we really need to think about all the end use cases of our work. For example, which version should the client use for social media? Will it be a GIF of rotating different logo versions on their website, or will they have different versions they use for different departments, for example? And it's our job to make sure that the brand and the logo design is really, really easy to use. We don't want the client to have to guess or try to come up with their own ways of using the brand as they're implementing it day to day. So how do we actually explain the system to our client? Because if we can't sell it, it probably won't be chosen. Here, mockups are our absolute best friend because they can really help visualize and help the client understand how this responsive logo and how this dynamic logo is going to work day to day in their different parts of their business, rather than just looking at a black logo on a white paper and trying to visualize all of this. Once you're ready to put your project together, we actually have a brand guide template in our shop. So if you don't want to start from scratch, you can go and check it out. I'll make sure to link it down in the description. We have so many exciting logo and branding videos coming out in 2025. So if you're interested in being part of an inclusive and encouraging creative community, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your projects, and I'll see you next time.